What it do, baby?
Welcome back to the ATV podcast. We're your host, Calvin,
Gary.
and today we'll be doing an analysis of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And as always, check out some of our other analyses below in our channel. And if you enjoy this video, I know we haven't been very consistent with our upload schedule, but we'll be trying our best to work that out, and we'll definitely have more videos uploaded in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah.
So to start, we would like to talk about some of the strengths of the Oklahoma City Thunder.
All right, going into the strengths for the Thunder, I think the biggest strength for them this season has definitely been their play in crunch time in the fourth quarter, especially with one guy, Chris Paul, of course, part of the blockbuster trade that sent him to Oklahoma City and Russell Westbrook to Houston. Chris Paul's really showed just how great of a player he still is and how great of a leader he is, one of the best in the league, leadership-wise and playing-wise. And he's definitely proved that, like I said, with the Thunder. They're the 5 seed right now with a record of 40-24, which I know I definitely didn't expect. I didn't even have them make the playoffs, which, looking back on it, is just crazy to think that they wouldn't even make the playoffs, seeing as how good they are now. But going into a little bit of their crunch time numbers, they're the most efficient team in the last few minutes of the game. Chris Paul is shooting 53% from the field, and he's averaging 3.5 points in crunch time, which is the most this season. I think he has, if I remember correctly, something like 180 points in the last 2 minutes of games this season, or something in that ballpark. He's been doing a great job leading that team, not to mention that Shea is second in crunch time points per game with just under 3 per game, or I'm sorry, about 2.5, just around that. So those two are a great tandem, first season together, great chemistry already. I can't wait to see what they do in the postseason.
Yeah, Chris Paul's definitely helped mentor SGA this season, and you can really tell from how Shea's been playing. And I definitely think he's gotten a lot more patient, and I definitely think that has something to do with Chris, helping him out. And he was already a pretty steady ball handler last season, but this season it seems like he's just he's more under control. His shot selection is better, and he's just overall a better player. So I definitely agree with you that the Oklahoma City Thunder is the best team in crunch time. And when we're defining like clutch, we're talking about like the last 2 minutes of a game, and when there's like a 5-point or less differential. So of course, as you already said, Chris Paul is probably the best player in the clutch this season. And like when you're narrowing down the games, because Chris Paul's played a lot of games in the clutch, and when you narrow it down to players that played more than 35 games in the clutch, Chris Paul is definitely the best player. And also, Shea, I know you already said he averages about 2.5 points, but he also shoots 57% from the field, which is very good. And again, the Thunder this season, actually they have a lot of good big storylines. First of all, I personally ruled them out at the beginning of the season, just because I felt like they were too inexperienced and Chris Paul was on his last legs. But Chris has really proved everyone wrong this season, and has really showed that he is still an all-star caliber player who can definitely lead a team into the playoffs, as he's doing this season. And SGA is one of the candidates for the most improved player, and and I definitely didn't expect him to take such a big jump in his second season, which is really bodes well for him in the future. And I think he just has a really high ceiling. I'm not sure how much more his offensive game will develop, but he definitely has a lot of potential on the defensive end because of his combination of size and his length. So just overall, I think SGA is someone that has a lot of potential, and definitely someone that I think the Thunder will be able to build around in the future. And again, and another storyline is that I don't think this gets talked about enough, but Billy Donovan has really changed how people view him this season. In the past, he he was always criticized for underperforming the playoffs, but looking at it this season, it just more seems like it was more of like a Westbrook thing than Billy Donovan's fault for like not coaching them well enough. Because as you can clearly see this season, they're outperforming everyone's expectations, and I think that's in big part due to Billy Donovan's coaching.
Definitely, he's done a great job with this group, and like you were saying about Westbrook, another thing I wanted to add is I think it's crazy to think that this season Shea and Chris Paul could get potentially more wins than Paul George and Russell Westbrook had in the playoffs combined together with just 3 wins. I mean, if the Thunder were to get out of a first round series, they would already have more wins than those two guys. So I definitely don't think it's been Billy Donovan. I think, like you said, it proves just how good of a coach he is, how great of a leader Chris Paul is, and how he kind of differentiates from Russell Westbrook as far as leadership goes. I think Westbrook kind of has, not trouble as being a leader. I think he's a good leader as it is, but especially when it comes to the postseason, I think he can definitely tend to underperform. And I know Chris Paul is known to be an underperformer in the playoffs too. But just something about this season and the way that he's played, the way that he's got these guys together, they have great chemistry. And that's crazy to think about, considering that 4 of their 5 starters are new to the team. You don't see that happen a lot. We've seen it a few times in the past, but I mean, these guys are playing great together. You have a great shooter in Gallinari giving you 19 a game, 40% from 3, a really sound big man, great lob finisher, and offensive and rebounder as a whole in Steven Adams. And not to mention, he has a good low post game too. I've always thought that they should give him more touches, but he's just never really had the opportunity to be a second or third option. And then their 3-headed guard tandem of Shea, Chris Paul, and Dennis Schroeder, one most improved player candidate, one 6th man of the year candidate. It's crazy just how good their chemistry is. It fits perfectly because you have a great clock manager in Chris Paul, a number 1 scoring option in Shea and Dennis Schroeder, those guys, kind of switching off. Not to mention Gallinari can give you 20, and Steven Adams is just a sound big man. So they're playing great together. They really seem to enjoy playing together. And, that's just how they've been so good, that, and with the coaching, you can really tell the camaraderie is there. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about Shea in particular, just because of how much of a jump he's taken. So he's going from a guy who averaged 11 and 3 rebounds a game last year to now averaging 19 and 6 rebounds a game, 47% from the field, 35% from 3. The way he plays, it's like he's in slow motion. He's really shifty with the ball. He's great in the pick and roll. He's got a really good floater game. He's got to work on the speed of his jumper a little bit, in my opinion, as far as like perimeter shooting, just off the dribble. But I only see him getting better from here, and I think that if he can pay off to be a multiple-time All-Star, then I really don't think they'll be regretting that Paul George trade at all.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think the only limitation to Shea's offense is his jumpers, just because it's really like a set shot, and it's pretty slow for a normal jumper. So I just think if he can improve that and maybe shoot it off the dribble a little better than he does. I mean, in the mid-range he shoots really well off the dribble. He has a couple of step backs, and he's really good at ball fakes. But just if he can stretch it out to the 3-point line, I really think that's where he'll be able to take the biggest jump in his offense. And again, as I was saying earlier, I think the area that Shea has the biggest potential in is on defense, just because he has such great length and size. And I definitely think his playmaking could use some work as well. He's definitely gotten better as a playmaker this season. And he's finding some of those like lob windows or like interior passes that he wasn't finding a year ago. And I definitely think that he's improved on that end, but I still see him as like just an average playmaker. So I think there's still a lot of room for improvement on as like in terms of playmaking.
For sure, I agree, and I think that I would say he's more suited for the shooting guard position than the point guard, but he's 6'6", he's a combo guard. I mean, some teams you could even play him as the small forward if you wanted to, or at least he can guard the 1 through 3. That's why he's so versatile, like you were saying, on the defensive end and the offensive end. His jumper, it kind of reminds me of Giannis in a way, in how it kind of has 2 different motions. Like they bring it up and then they kind of hunch it back, and then they shoot. It's almost like a hesitation at the top. So if he, like we've been saying, if he can work on the speed of his jumper, I can definitely see him as an all-star for years to come. And
Definitely.
so another advantage I wanted to talk about are the big men of the Thunder. I don't feel like they get enough credit. They never have, especially Steven Adams. He never gets credit for what he does. But
Yep.
he's a great rebounder, a great interior defender. Like, people don't want to drive on Steven Adams. You know, he's
Hmm.
a really, really tough player. He sets some of the best screens in the league. You've seen the
Definitely.
compilations of him bodying players. I mean, he's absolutely ridiculous. Not to mention, like I've said earlier, he's got a great hook shot and he's got a great spin move. And when you put all
Hmm.
that together, you get a really, really good big man. He kind of reminds me of DeAndre Jordan from the Clippers.
Yeah.
Obviously, not the same athleticism as far as like catching lobs over and over again. He's definitely more versatile on the offensive end, but great rebounder, great energy type player. You would want him on your team for sure. And then as a backup, Nerlens Noel doesn't get any credit for what he does.
Yep.
And the Thunder's bench is definitely one of their weak spots outside of Dennis Schroeder and Nerlens Noel. So he really helps giving them that second bona fide bench guy to where you can give him 25 minutes a night and you don't have to be worried because he's going to give you, 8 points, 5 to 6 rebounds, really good
Hmm.
defense. And he just plays his role really well. So him and Dennis Schroeder make a really good lob, 1-5 combo off the bench.
Yep.
And without him and Adams, they would definitely struggle on the defensive end as far as size goes at the small forward position.
Yeah, I
Guarding
couldn't agree. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And Steven Adams is a guy who's, he's obviously very experienced, and he's been the defensive anchor for the Thunder team this season. And he's always been known as a great defensive center, but again, as what you were saying earlier, he doesn't get enough credit on the offensive end. And plus, like we haven't even mentioned yet, he's probably the best offensive rebounder in the league. And Nerlens Noel has really been their second bench guy this season, and he's really brought a resurgence in his career. And he's always been known as a good, decent defensive center, but it seemed like he wasn't gonna last in the league much longer with how he was doing. But this season, he's really shown that he can give you good energy, rebounding, and defense off the bench, and he's been a pretty good lob threat this season as well. And just having that consistency off the bench has really been helping a really weak bench for the Thunder this season. And we'll get more in depth into their bench later on when we talk about some of their weaknesses. But just having Nerlens Noel there as their second bench guy behind Dennis Schroeder is just really beneficial to the coaching staff. And also, I know you kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I just wanted to talk about the Thunder's best lineup, which is the combination of CP3, Shea, Steven Adams, aka Aquaman,
Yeah.
Dennis Schroeder, and Gallinari. And this is their best lineup, and they've played, I think, around 40 games together. And this lineup is crazy good. They have a 127.9 offensive rating and a 98 defensive rating. And just looking through some of their lineups, and by the way, they played 177 minutes together with that lineup. So I think that is definitely a lineup that they need to play more, just because of how good it is statistically. And plus, it has a crazy with such a good offensive and defensive rating, it has a very good net rating, obviously. So. But when I was looking through the lineups, I noticed a very interesting trend. It's that any lineups that's played with CP3, SGA, and Dennis Schroeder are all really good. They're all above the Thunder's normal offensive and defensive rating by a large margin. And I think these three guys are definitely the guys that Billy Donovan needs to play more, especially in the playoffs. And that's their crunch time lineup, which is why they're why the Thunder are so good in crunch time, because this lineup just absolutely destroys their opponents. And just any lineup really with CP3, SGA, and Dennis Schroeder are just really, really good. So I think that's a really big strength coming into the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. 128 offensive rating. That's crazy when they're on the
Yeah.
floor together.
Hmm.
And I think, that's just, it's because you have three guys who can beat you off the dribble. And with most teams, you have maybe an elite backcourt or two good guards or maybe a good point guard, small forward, whatever the case may be. They have three guards that can beat you off the dribble and a sharpshooter and a lob finisher. That's the perfect lineup, if you're an NBA coach or GM.
Yep.
And that's obviously why they play so well together. I think one other guy that I wanted to talk about, I may mispronounce this, Lugens Dort. I'm not sure if I pronounced his first name correctly, but he's been really good for them in his 29 games. He started 21. The Thunder, as we all know, they've had it for years, ever since Kevin Durant left, depending on if they played Paul George at the small forward, but they've always had a lack of shooting guards or a lack of small forwards. And Dort is no all-star, but he definitely plays his role really well. He's a great hustler and a great defender. And if he can develop a three-point shot, he could be, a better version of Terrence Ferguson and maybe give you 8 to 10 points a game, which they could really use.
Yeah, definitely. And and I totally forgot to list some of the basic stats for the Thunder. So they're 14th in offensive rating at 111, 9th in defensive rating at 108, and they're 5th in field goal percentage at 47.3. And they actually, like, their defense is pretty good both in the interior and out to the 3-point line, as they have the 8th best opponent 3-point percentage at just 34.5, and they are the 8th best in defensive field goal percentage from less than 6 feet away from the rim, so it's basically just anywhere in the paint, at 59.3%. So that just really shows they have a pretty good perimeter defense, as well as a pretty good interior defense as well. And of course that has to do with some defenders like CP3, Shea, and Steven Adams.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like we've been saying, Thunder, big sleeper. Last advantage for me is just their free throw percentage. They're 7th in the league at 80%. We've talked about this in several videos before. When you can shoot the free throw well in close games in the playoffs, you're good to go. And one of the best free throw shooters of this time, Chris Paul and Shea shooting over 80%, Dennis Schroeder 80%, Gallinari 88%. Steven Adams, 59, but he's not Shaq, so they definitely can shoot the free throw well, and I think that's really my last advantage for them. I think that's all I have for the Thunder as far as the are concerned.
Yeah. So let's move on to some of their weaknesses, and as we've already mentioned, their lack of depth is one of their biggest weaknesses. It's not that they don't have good players, it's just they have a lot of really young players, and the problem with that is with having a bunch of rookies or sophomores, is that they're not really experienced. And this season, it's like for someone like Terrence Ferguson, who's been in a really big slump this season, they've been really lacking a lot of depth, really outside of maybe shooter Nerlens Noel, maybe I don't know, who else can you play? I mean, they play Henry Diallo. I mean, Dort, I think it's definitely a serviceable player coming into the playoffs, but you have Terrence Ferguson, who's shooting sub 30% from 3 this season. And that's really all they want him to do, is be a good shooter off the bench, and he's just shooting horrible this season. And then you have I don't know, Mike Muscala, Deontay Burke.
A couple of decent shooters, but that's about it.
Yeah, and Darius Baisley, Abdul Nader, they're all really, really young. They just lack, outside of Dennis Schroeder, they lack really any depth behind Dennis Schroeder. I mean, they have Nerlens Noel and Dort, who I think are good enough to be able to be played in the playoffs, but when the rest of your bench is sophomores and rookies who are all not doing as well as I would say they probably should be, or are just expected to. Yeah, just off the benches, the amount of inexperience might really cost them in the playoffs, when other teams with really good benches can just take advantage of that.
Yeah, not to mention Dort started most of his games, and I would assume he would be in the playoffs. So after Schroeder and Noel, I really just don't know who to. I know they're young, but I mean, a lot of them are just inefficient. Diallo shooting 20% from three. Darius Baisley 38% from the field. Mike Muscala and Abdel Nader are shooting okay. Abdel Nader. Deontay Burton shooting 21% from three and 37% from the field. So they're just not, just point blank, they're just not great players off the bench after Schroeder and Noel. And that's definitely their biggest weakness, especially if somebody were to get hurt or, something were to happen with everything that's been going on. You just hope that everybody in that starting lineup and with Dennis Schroeder and Noel, that they all stay healthy, because you may only be able to play 7 for a good amount of the playoffs. At least in close games as well in the second half.
Yeah, and also they're not very good at shooting threes either, which is really essential in today's NBA. Really, outside of their 4 starters in CP3, Shea, Gallinari, and
just Dennis Schroeder after bench, I would say.
Yeah, I guess Dennis Schroeder. Outside of those 4, they really have no one else that's like a pretty good shooter. They have Mike Muscala, who's shooting like 36% from 3, but he's only playing 12 minutes a game. And you have like Abdel Nader, who's shooting 37%, which is pretty good, but he's only playing like around 15 minutes a game. And everyone else you're playing are all shooting below like 34% from 3. So that overall just translates into having only the 18th best 3-point percentage at 35.5%, and they're only 27 in 3-point attempts. So they're taking some of the lowest 3-point attempts in the game. And in today's NBA, you need to be shooting more threes.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that's for sure a big weakness, and also some other categories that they rank in the bottom half of the league for. They're 28th in assists per game, 23rd in rebounds per game, and they're dead last in fast break points per game. The assists I'm not worried about, because obviously, as we've said, they move the ball well with one of the best passers of all time in Chris Paul. But I do think Dennis Schroeder and Shea could be a little bit more passive, as you were saying earlier with Shea, finding those windows a little bit sooner, maybe a few more lobs here or there. But also, like we've been saying, when you don't have a lot of great 3-point shooters to kick it out to, especially in Schroeder's case, playing with the bench, maybe you don't always want to kick it out. You want to take those shots for yourself, because that's probably your highest percentage at getting a bucket. So that's kind of a tough balance for them. They got to get more shooters this offseason for sure. And then with the fast break points, that's a big concern for me. We've talked about it many times before. In the playoffs, it's condensed, it's in the half court, it's slower. You got to be able to get easy buckets whenever you can get them. And if you're only averaging 9 fast break points per game, with your lack of depth, players are going to get tired, and you're not going to get a lot of easy buckets. So that's definitely a concern for me with the Thunder.
Yeah, definitely. I think at the end of the day, I think some teams are just going to have more talent than the Thunder. And they're gonna be able to take advantage of a pretty weak bench, and we'll just have to see how Shea performs. And CP3, I know he's been said in the past as that he does worse in the playoffs, or he chokes in the playoffs, but I really don't think that is the case. When you look at the statistics, it really doesn't show him getting sure, he's not. I don't have the exact statistics, but really doesn't show him getting much worse. In fact, I think he actually becomes a little more efficient in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I think it's just the because his teams always underachieve, that he's been labeled as a choker in the past. And also, he's always been injury prone, especially in the playoffs. So that's also really costed them. So at the end of the day, I think if Chris Paul can stay healthy, I think they really have a good chance of doing better than the Paul George and Russell Westbrook Thunder era.
Definitely. If I had to give a comparison to a team with what the Thunder are now, I would have to say they remind me a lot of the Lob City Clippers. I know they don't play the same way, but they remind me in the sense, well, they both have Chris Paul, and they have one other. They have a bona fide second option, Blake Griffin with the Clippers, and Shea with the Thunder. They have a great 6-man, Jamal Crawford with the Clippers, Schroeder with the Thunder, and a really serviceable big man with Steven Adams now and DeAndre Jordan back then. But I think also the reason that I bring this up is because I see a lot of resemblance in those two teams, and I can see that happening in the playoffs with what happened with the Lob City Clippers, to where
Yeah.
really good regular season team, but at the end of the day, they have no depth at the small forward position,
Mm-hmm.
and they just don't have quite enough, in my opinion. Gallinari kind of plays a JJ Redick role, but he's better. But I see more or less the same success. I see maybe the second round. I see the second round as the Thunder's ceiling, but I don't see them making a conference final this year.
Yeah, definitely, and I have to agree with you on that. This is a team that I think they excelled in the regular season, but I'm not sure how well they're going to do in the playoffs. Especially, if anything, being in the bubble has given them like an advantage because there's a bunch of teams who are going to be missing players come playoff time. And the Thunder is a team that I don't think I'm pretty sure they don't have anyone that's not going to Orlando.
Yeah, not at the moment. Yeah, everybody's
Yeah,
there.
so they're all healthy, and though I'm not sure who their matchups are gonna be, just because they're all healthy. They have some sort of advantage over certain teams. Like we all saw what happened to the Nets, where half their team has COVID-19 and they've had to sign a lot of free agents. So, but to me, even then, just with so many talented teams this year, I have them going maybe like I say their floor is exit in the first round, but like I think they will at least win 2 games. But I think their ceiling is only the second round, because I just really don't see them as having enough potential to make the conference finals against so many talented teams.
The only way I see them making a conference final is if they played a team like Utah in the first round, which I definitely could see them beating without Bogdanovich. And then if they played Denver in the second round, I could see them winning that series. The only way I see them making a conference final is if the 2 LA teams play in the second round and if Houston's not in the second round, but that's very unlikely. But besides that, I completely agree with what you said.
Yeah. So I actually really liked your comparison with the Lob City Clippers, because I think as great of a team as they are in the regular season, they're going to struggle in the playoffs just because it's as you said, the game's more condensed. They're gonna have to rely on their bench more, but the problem is they can't. They're gonna have to play the starters a lot, and they're gonna get tired. They're gonna get worn out. So
maybe sign Flight. I don't know.
Hey, it might be a smart move, man. I mean, June Flight. I mean, though he doesn't have many wins, I'm sure he's just holding back.
Wait for
Clearly, he's afraid he's gonna attract too much interest, if he plays too good.
I mean, I agree. Warriors they gotta free up some money this offseason. I'll say that.
Yeah, Flight's waiting for the Warriors to make it back in the playoffs so they can sign him.
He's a smart man,
Yep. So yeah, that's really it for our analysis of the Oklahoma City Thunder. If you enjoyed this episode, as I said in the beginning, go check out some of our other episodes. And if you like this video and have any thoughts to share, just feel free to leave a comment down below. And as always, we'll see you guys in the next one.
See ya.